Well, we will have to see which of these options comes through. I think it's too early at this point to predict. It is certainly a major rebuke for the European Union, so to jump right away to interpreting it as an opportunity, I think would be dangerous, because it actually would overlook the significant problems of European integration to which this referendum actually points, and that is that the project of European integration, which we plausibly laud as a great peace project, as something that has provided many important opportunities to Europeans, this project is also resented by a significant share of the population, and those are particularly those people who see themselves as losers of globalization. Those are less educated people, working class people, older people, people who live in rural areas or more generally outside of metropolitan centers. They do not, to the same extent, see the benefits of European integration, and it's a major problem for the European Union that these people have not been won over for the European project. Therefore, I do think it indicates a problem, a crisis of European integration, and now the question is, how will the EU respond to it? It does not indicate that there will immediately be a ripple effect of more and more states leaving the European Union, even though some Eurosceptics feel emboldened by the decision. But it will also not mean that just because Britain was sometimes a difficult member, difficult to get along with on some issues, that all obstacles are gone now and the 27 remaining states can move forward. That will require some serious reflection on how to actually address these weaknesses of the European project. Well, I think it really has to work on making the benefits of European integration for all of society more clearly visible. And that's in part an issue of communication. And it's really just of explaining to the citizens more explicitly what the concrete benefits of European integration are. But it's in part also a matter of changing policy, of really developing more programs that help these losers of globalization. So they have to follow on these two tracks. And on both tracks, the member states are actually of central importance. Member state politicians will have to begin explaining why European integration is something that they want to pursue, rather than blaming the EU for everything that they don't like, which is sometimes the preferred communication strategy of national politicians. And member state politicians will also have to be willing to give the EU more powers in fields of social policy and so on, where right now the member states really try to protect their competencies, because it's about money, tax income, redistribution, issues that haven't really been shifted to the European level. Education is very important, maybe not so much at the university level as really in high schools. And in Europe there's quite some variation between member states in the extent to which, for instance, the political system of the European Union is explained to students in civics courses or politics courses in school. But that is, of course, today absolutely essential, because so many policies in all member states are influenced by the EU level, and the EU has a big problem with being perceived as remote, inaccessible, non-transparent and so on, which in part is due to the fact that it's a very complicated entity, but in part is also due to the fact that there isn't enough political education on European politics. So this is certainly very important. I don't want to sound as if nothing has happened in this respect. Europe is part of the curriculum in most member states in their educational systems, but clearly it isn't working as well as it should, and it reaches, of course, primarily young people. This is something that we see also quite clearly in the Brexit, that the young people voted primarily to remain. Older people, of course, are more difficult to reach, so we would have to think about continuing education programs that appeal to these people who are no longer in school, but really also need to update their political understandings, because they approach the European Union from a perspective of what they are used to, nation-based politics, and find it difficult to understand what's going on there in Brussels. I would expect so. It depends, of course, on the arrangement that is being negotiated with the United Kingdom, which is very unclear at this point how exactly it will look. But the focus in the EU will shift. We've already seen meetings this week where Germany and France, their leaders, met with the Italian Prime Minister. Italy was not usually part of these types of meetings, so it seems that Italy might be actually a winner in status, and that of course means something in terms of sort of how the EU is governed. Italy traditionally often more accommodating towards Russia than the UK, so we can imagine some shifts in policy emerging from that. You mentioned foreign policy specifically, and that's very important. The UK and France are the largest military powers in the European Union. They have been the driving force of the development of military capabilities in the European security and defense policy. Losing Britain will be a very major turning point there as well, and that will require some reconfiguration of how these policies work. Well, first of all, primarily the idea of a European superstate is a pejorative description of the European Union. First presented, among others, by Margaret Thatcher after she turned towards Euroscepticism in the 1980s, saying that we do not want a European superstate to reimpose regulation that her neoliberal revolution had just done away with in the UK. So overwhelmingly the term superstate is being seen as something negative. There are some academics, for instance Glyn Morgan from the University of Syracuse, who has written a book, The Case for the European Superstate, saying that, well, there should actually be a European superstate, but I don't think this idea will get any traction in public discourse, simply because people don't want the EU to become a state. And that was very clear, for instance, in the constitutional debate, where moving in the early 2000s, the idea of creating a formal constitution for the EU with all that constitutional symbolism and terminology and so on was rejected in referendums because it sounded too state-like to citizens. So therefore I don't think that there's any realistic chance of turning this idea of a superstate from a negative term into something positive. I would try to avoid state-like terminology altogether if I were to design communication strategy for the EU.